Hi there, my name's Steve, and I would love to invite you for just a few minutes to engage your imagination and come on a journey with me. Imagine, if you will, that you and I are story writers, and we have been approached by Disney Pixar to write their next cinema classic, the next big blockbuster. And they've given us a brief and they've said, as part of this story, we would love for there to be a twist at the end. So we're sitting down today for our first planning meeting, and we would be well advised to make sure that this film wasn't a flop, to look through the back catalogue and to see whether there was anything that we could spot that sort of made the components of a good cinema classic. And I've done that, and I'd like to share my findings with you. I find in almost all of the great films there's a presence of a conflict. There's the presence of a conflict between good and evil, wrong and right, dark and light. There's almost always this conflict, and it's almost always played out by a hero and by a villain. You could think of Simba as he overthrew Uncle Scar and the hyenas. You could think of the Sheriff of Nottingham being taken on by the courageous Robin Hood. There's almost always too this idea of a curse that can perhaps only be broken by certain events and certain people. Remember, if you will, Princess Aurora, Sleeping Beauty, who was placed under a curse that she would die before her 16th birthday, which could only be reversed by true love's kiss. Some of these films also include this idea of sacrifice. Think of Frozen 2, when Anna made the decision that the dam could be burst, even though that would sacrifice the village of Arendelle, the place that she grew up and loved. And often when we look around, we see people in these villages and towns, and they live this kind of grey existence. They're despondent, they're desperate. And you contrast that with the end scenes when the dust has settled and suddenly there's a different level of colour and vibrance, and there's plants and flowers growing and there's smiles everywhere. So with some of these concepts, let's just unpick some of our plot and pad that out a little bit. We need a people. Let's just say that we're working with an imaginary village called Rebelon, and that the people who come from Rebelon are known as rebels. These people need to be trapped and to be living a miserable existence, but we need to help our viewers understand why. So let's say that they're trapped because generations ago, many years ago, one man defied an instruction that had been given. One man disobeyed, and as a consequence of that disobedience, everyone that came after him was trapped under this curse. And let's say that the penalty of this curse was death. People trapped under the curse and sentenced to death. And some of these rebels had tried throughout the years to improve their lot, to get themselves out from under this curse. And they tried good moral behaviour, they tried self-improvement, they tried charitable giving, and everything had failed. You see, these rebels were desperate, but they were hopeless. They knew that they were created for more, but they were trapped and powerless to do a thing about it. And let's just embellish our plot a little bit and say that throughout the generations, stories had been told. A promise had been passed on that one would come one day to set rebels free. And here we have our first twist. We can introduce a character, a king from a far-off land who's kind and who's loving, who sees the mess of the rebels and is moved with pity, so sends his son to put things right. And this son travels from a far-off distant land and lives amongst the rebels. And then one day he bursts onto the scene. And we have to ask ourselves the question in our plot, do we want that to be with a show of might and brute force, or is there a different way? Could this hero actually, in order to put the ancient wrong right, could he do things differently? Could he, in fact, bear himself the curse and pay himself the price in place of the rebels? And what if the people of Rebelon weren't actually nice people? What if they knew of this king but had ignored him? What if they were aware of him but had just dismissed him previously? Well, even so, our hero could still come and pay the price that they should pay in order that they could know freedom. So let's recap. We have an act of defiance that trapped people for generations. We have this curse that couldn't be broken by anything that they could do themselves. We have a people who needed a hero, a saviour, one who had been talked about and looked forward to for years, one sent from another kingdom, another land, by a kind and loving king. And then onto the scene we have bursting this hero who would bear the curse and pay its penalty once and for all, bringing freedom to all who would recognise what he did. That sounds like quite a blockbuster. But what if the biggest twist we'd saved was for the end? What if, having given up his life in order that rebels could be freed, our hero was actually then brought back to life? What if he came back to life and went back to his father who'd sent him and took with him rebels who would follow him? And here is the real twist, that we're not asked to write the greatest blockbuster ever, because that's already been written and it's already been played out in full. A loving king, God, who was moved with compassion and pity for rebels like you and like me, who were trapped, and so sent his son to bear that curse and to pay its price, but didn't leave him there, raised him back to life. And Jesus, now back with the Father, introduces rebels like you and me to him, that we could know full freedom. I hope that's helped you to think and provoked some questions. I would love to hear your thoughts, your comments, and answer any questions that you've got. Be blessed this Easter.